Hi, guys. Let me begin with a thought provoking question. What do you think is the single most powerful lever a corporation can pull to stay ahead in a rapidly changing world? Welcome to today's podcast on corporate venturing and innovation strategy. I'm your host, Maximiliano Carlomanho, co founder of InnoScience, and I'm thrilled to have you with us for this fascinating conversation. For many, the answer to my question lies in venturing into the future, not just metaphorically, but literally. Corporate venturing has become a central strategy for businesses to explore emerging technologies, tap into entrepreneurial ecosystem, and unlock growth in ways that traditional approaches simply cannot match. And to impact this critical topic, we have gathered three experts who have been shaping the field. Hi, Claudia. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me back in Brazil.
Thank you, Claudia. Claudia is a professor of entrepreneurship at the INSEAD, is a leading authority on private equity, venture capital, and corporate venturing with decades of experience advising companies globally. Another expert who is joining us is Scott Leonard. Hi, Scott. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Scott. Scott is president of Touchdown Ventures and visiting professor at UCLA. And Scott has been a pioneer in corporate venture capital, helping companies not only to structure but to manage successful CVC programs. Hi, Arthur. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me here as well.
Thank you for your time. It's going to be a pleasure to have the opportunity to dig deeper in discussions we have already talked about. Arthur is Oxygia's CEO and leads the corporate venture capital arm dedicated to building corporate ventures through investments, venture building, and partnerships with startups. So I have so many things to discuss with you guys, but to help our audience to strategically frame the corporate venturing challenge, I think we can move in a why, what, and how structure. So I would like to begin with the why, Claudia. Why should companies use corporate venturing to navigate disruption? So, what are the main reasons, Claudia, driving companies to seek innovation outside their own boundaries?
Quite a few of the corporates are being asked by their clients, their customers, for example, to come up with solutions that are clearly outside their remit. So call it Horizon 2, Horizon 3, too far away. How do you basically create those add-on solutions that the clients are asking for? Because clearly, the one thing to maintain a good client relationship is to ensure that your clients are happy. How can you find things that keep your customer base happy? So that's the first reason. And the second reason is to expand into new fields, into new areas. I see that when I work with family businesses, when the next generation very often comes in, the next generation may not want to do whatever their father and grandfathers or grandmothers have done beforehand. So they're looking for different things. Without throwing the baby out with the bath, they like to add on to the existing environment. So those are, I think, the two main reasons.
Thanks. Very interesting point.
It's like offense and defense, right? On the one hand, you need to defend your existing business and make sure it's still relevant. On the other hand, you want to pursue new opportunities. I had an experience where I was in front of an audience of about 200 directors of private and public boards. And I asked the question, who here thinks you're insulated from disruption? And literally out of 200 people, one guy raises his hand. He was in his 70s and everybody laughed. And I said, okay, what do you do? And he said, we make battleships. And then he kept talking. And for another 30 seconds, he talked about how the battleships last for 70 years or 100 years. And then he said, but to sell the next battleship, I actually need to have the latest stuff in it. So he talked himself out of the idea that he was insulated from disruption. Everybody in the world has to face change.
Yeah.
And Scott, what are the market conditions that foster the growth of corporate venture and especially corporate venture capital in your point of view?
Well, it's a number of the things that we just talked about, and it's also the resources combined with that need. So the corporations have the capital on the balance sheet. They've changed what they've been doing with R&D internally. There's trillions of dollars being invested in startups, and those startups are all pursuing things that can't be done internally. So with a recognition that you can make a financial gain and also produce strategic results, corporations are saying this is one modality that we can use to innovate.
it seems to be a top management issue. Arthur, having set up a corporate venture arm within a large incumbent company, what role do boards of directors play in such strategic decisions?
Many. Let me start by that. And I think one of the things that we got it right in Oxygia is that we started our process at the top. So we got the board approval. We carefully explained what we wanted to do. We did a lot of benchmarking with other, I would say, with the most enduring CVCs practices around the world, right? So we came back home with all these, let me call it the key success factors, right? We learned from who did this the right way, who did this the wrong way, so we could get those key success factors to put up Oxygia. And then from that point on, it was easy to talk to the senior leadership, right? And then to explain to them that they needed to look into that from a perspective, from a risk perspective, right? To give us the guidance, sort of the boundary conditions we need to act. And within those boundary conditions, we had the ability and the autonomy to do things to cope with the startup ecosystem, right? But it was very important at that moment that we explained to them how that worked, right? So they could come and say, hey, this is what you guys need to do. This is the oversight we need to have upon you guys, right? And they were very clear on the fact that they didn't know much of the startup ecosystem, so we built that together, right? And we told them, okay, you guys need to give the strategic oversight here for this and all the risk management. For instance, reputational risk is something very important for our parent company, for Braskem, right? That's one of the reasons why we have a name that's not Braskem Ventures, for instance, is Oxygia. Why we do some shadow endorsement that helps us to do business with Braskem competitors, to their suppliers and clients, and so on and so forth. So I would say that the most important thing is it's the strategic oversight that they do it, and all this risk, I would say risk analysis that they do from a top perspective, from a top level, and to ensure that the investment thesis that we have is aligned with the company. I think that's from the get-go is the most important thing. If you miss on that one, you have problems for the remainder of your operation.
How you, Arthur, and how you guys have set these strategic against financial orientation in Oxygia's thesis?
No, absolutely. So we start, it seems like yesterday or long ago. I don't know how you guys can put that together, but we had COVID back in beginning of 2020, right? End of 2019, beginning of 2020. And at that moment, we were contemplating ourselves and discussing, okay, what's going to happen to the chemical industry, right? This may be the worst year ever. And it ended up being the best year ever for the chemical industry for a cadre of reasons. But that gave us sort of a headache and pushed us to think, what are the other trends that have the potential to cause a disruption? And we did this exercise and we came very quickly to the conclusion that sustainability and digital transformation were in the very center of that, right? So the strengthening of ESG practices, digital transformation, so on and so forth. Reason I'm saying this is because we knew what was our investment thesis. We knew the strategic point of our mandate we needed to follow, right? So from a get-go, we knew that, okay, we're going to focus on these areas. But at the same time, we position ourselves as purely financial when we talk outside. And for some of the reasons that Scott just mentioned, and I like to really emphasize on this, because if you're doing a deal with other VCs, and if they perceive that you're there just to learn and you're investing, you're not looking for financial returns, you're not going to go invest with those guys. So it's very important that they perceive you as a financial orientated fund, right? And we did this exercise here in Brazil through a BVCAP, through the Brazilian Venture Capital Association, where we did this comprehensive research, and we learned that I would say 90% of the CVCs in Brazil, they don't really pay attention to financial KPIs. And to me, that was shocking because we know that there's this moment, right? Right now we are in the honeymoon moment, right? It's the fund's still young, so you don't have that much pressure to return quantitative KPIs, but the moment we'll get there, right? So if you don't pay attention to financial KPIs, that's a problem. So I would say that, again, it's important to have this dual mandate where you have the strategic alignment with the company, but you need to focus very much on the financial KPIs. Otherwise, you're not going to last. It's going to be a one fun only?
Well, we have our internal strategic KPIs. Obviously, when we're interacting with the startups, we talk about what value we're giving back to them because they're definitely interested in that. But, to your point, from how we present ourselves, we're just like you. I was on a board when I was an institutional venture capitalist, and I remember a corporate VC saying, we're talking about the next round, and they said, well, we don't care. We're just here to learn. And every single institutional VC and the entrepreneurs looked at those people and said, basically get out of the room. You're not aligned with the rest of us. We're all here to make this enterprise succeed. And you're here for some different reason that has nothing to do with that. We want to learn and we want to get value back to the parent company, but we also want to give value. The presentation to the rest of the industry has to be that we're here to help everybody make money, and we'll benefit from that as well based on our equity position.
Thanks. Very interesting point. Claudia, could you, following up to this KPI discussion, could you dig deeper into the potential KPIs a CVC unit could use to measure its progress?
Yeah, the eternal conversation about financial versus strategic, and as you will see later on in my slides, I look at it as a spectrum. And when you ask basically CEOs all the time or boards, the answer usually is, if I say is it financial or strategic, the answer is always both. Which is a little bit of a cop-out, obviously, right? If you want to be honest, right? You don't know whether you're coming or going. And maybe back on that as well, ignoring financial KPIs, I think, is very dangerous because you gotta never forget you're working inside an organization. And organizations stand and fall with financial returns because they have investors, whether they're private or whether they're public investors. And those investors want to see numbers. Yeah, they compare you on that. So it doesn't mean you have to make financial your be all and end all, but you got to keep an eye on finance. So it's super important to me. Now, where do you spend time on that spectrum? Really depends. I've had conversations with CEOs where the CEO said, look, Claudia, what I expect of the CVC team in Silicon Valley or wherever in Berlin, wherever they may be sitting, I don't expect them to come back with a 10, 20, 300x on their return. And frankly, even if they come back with a 200x on one investment, it's not going to move my share price. But what I want from them is intelligence. Intelligence on my clients, intelligence on the world outside. Tell me what I don't know. Tell me what I don't hear from my strategy department, from my R&D department, and so on. And I think what's really difficult, and I give the corporates that get it right a lot of credit, is to find the right KPIs. Because whatever is the KPI for Siemens is not the KPI for BASF, is not the KPI for any of the other organizations. It's a very personalized thing, and it has to fit. So the way I look at it, all those KPIs and the setup, and there's more to it, in terms of the team structure and so on, they're all ingredients, and the ingredients have to be right. So I like to bake, okay? So, and when you make let's say, a perfect souffle, right? You need to get the ingredients right. If the ingredients are not right, the souffle may rise, but will very quickly sit down as well. And sitting down in this case is not a good situation. So you would want to basically appreciate that. So that's how I look at it. I think it's really, really hard because I cannot come out and say, I get asked all the time, Claudia, what are the perfect KPIs? I don't know. What is perfect for Scott is not perfect for Oxygea. It's not perfect for another corporate. It is personal. And you have to, and I would argue from what I've seen, you're probably not going to get it right the first time around. You have to kind of work out what are people asking, find the right things. Scott, jump in.
It's so important, this personalization. This is a key principle for how we work with corporations because it's not even what's right for one corporation is going to be right for them 18 months or 24 months from now because the CEO changes, the world changes, technology changes, the market changes. All of these things are changing rapidly because we live in a dynamic world. And I remember when we started the program for the film studio at 20th Century Fox, we, at the time, were thinking about buying Warner Brothers. We didn't expect that the company was going to be bought by Disney. Fox was going through a major change in itself. And it used to be that the major Hollywood studios thought that they competed with each other. And then they woke up one day and said, hold on a second. Netflix and Amazon have changed the game on us. And these people that we thought were our enemies are actually our best friends because they're going through the same thing. None of us have the data on who our customers were. And so you have to say the KPIs for me are going to be different today. They're certainly different from my peers or my competitors. And if you can't bake them personally, this really goes back, to the question that you asked at the beginning, Max, which is what's the one lever you can pull? And my answer would be there is no one lever. You have to sit and pay attention, think about yourself, think about the world, and then what those KPIs should be, I think do vary based on the horizons. So, we always talk about the study that INSEAD did about how it's 4 years before the typical CVC is shut down. We know that it's 5 to 7 years before a typical venture capital investment is returned. And that's math that even a venture capitalist can do, which is, 5 is more than 4.
Yes.
So, what do you do about that? Well, you better have some kind of results in the period before those 4 years get there. What those results are should not be venture capital returns, unless you're making very late stage investments, which is not what most of these programs are doing. And that has to be personalized.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to your question earlier on boards, right? So my question note to them always is, when we're starting off, is do you realize, forget about corporate venturing, do you realize what the world of venture looks like? Let me tell you, because we have data since what, 1955? Georges Doriot launched the first things. We have a lot of data in different times of macroeconomic environment. So we can go back and I can show a board and I say, look, you want to do early stage investing? 8 out of 10 investments will fail. Yep. I can tell you, they may have been asleep the whole time. When I say 8 out of 10 will fail, I usually get, sorry, you just said 8 out of 10? Yeah. So, and I learned that basically you got to hit them with the facts. And so you're entering a new environment. So guess what? You're not in Kansas anymore. Okay. So can you handle it? So to me, this is really, really important that the boards really understand what they're entering. So, and I think it's also important for the CVC team or the corporate venturing team in the widest sense to ensure that they continuously communicate that internally and keep perspectives clear. Because like you said, people change, people forget, our memory decays in power law fashion. So whatever you said 18 months ago, guess how many people remember it?
How many people are even there?
Class, exactly. So people will not remember. So.
And setting the KPIs is so difficult. I mean,
yeah,
we've gone through that exercise. And the way that we set it up is you start more qualitative, right? Because that's what you can sort of return first, right? And we really pay attention to all the positive externalities we can generate for the parent company, right? Sometimes it's not even in our investment thesis, but we look into a startup and say, hey, maybe there's something here for the, shared services department, for instance. If they do something small, they're in a large corporation, that's millions of dollars of savings per year. So we try to bring those home because it's important to evangelize and explain to everyone and say, hey, these are the KPIs they should be expecting in the beginning, and then they will accumulate with the quantitative KPIs afterwards when the time is right, so you can start giving returns. So it's a very, and I fully agree, I mean, it's a very, I would say, particular process for each CVC, for each company out there, and you just need to find out what's right for you, and it's not that easy, but we went through that process, and I can tell you we're still fine-tuning that process, and I'm pretty sure you're going to be doing that for the remainder of Oxygen.
We're never going to stop talking about it. I mean, and you said, Claudia, the learning might be the most valuable thing. I don't know how many CEOs have said to you, I want to see around the corner. That's why I want corporate venturing, right? I want to know the future before it happens. Venture capital is particularly well suited to do that because the startups are going to be bringing their solutions 3 years, 5 years, 7 years from now, and you get to see the market before it actually happens. And by looking at large volumes of deal flow, you're going to synthesize that data and see what signals are entrepreneurs reading in the market that's driving them to produce certain solutions. And then you start to see, well, a bunch of people have this idea. How many are generating revenue? How many have developed product market fit? How many are actually driving results in the marketplace? And over time, you look at that data set and you can start making investment decisions. It's not at the same level of investment in private equity where we have real businesses that are predictable, but you're starting to see forms of evidence where you can speak to customers, or inside a corporate environment, We can actually run pilots. We can have scientists look at these products and see if they actually work. Can they do things that we can't do internally? And those are forms of data that help with learning. Hopefully, you're also doing it while making investment returns that are adjusted to the stage of risk. So if you're doing seed or early stage investing, expectations are set that maybe 8 out of 10 are going to fail. You do need to have this metric that says, we're going to target top quartile returns, right? It puts a real wrench in the works if you say, I'm going to go in and deliberately lose money. Again, those are other modalities that we can tap into if the idea is that we can't underwrite to venture capital returns.
Yeah. Guys, now that we understand the reasons driving corporate venturing, let's shift our focus to the what. What are the key models companies use to pursue this strategy? And Claudia, you have mentioned before that there are more corporate venturing models than there are companies venturing.
I think so.
Could you share the most common models and especially the strategic goals these different models address?
Yeah. So in no particular order. So, but let's start off maybe with the most well-known, and that's corporate venture capital, meaning we look for startups, we invest in those startups at whatever stage, and we then basically go along for the ride. It may be as a quiet investor, it may be with a board seat, it may be with anything. It doesn't really matter. So that's corporate venture capital, where you obviously compete with VCs, where you're contributing to the ecosystem in terms of supporting those startups. You should never forget that the good startups will not need your money. So money is not a differentiator. And I say this really, I think this is a really, really important point to understand. Just because you have money doesn't give you a justification to play in that game. Okay? So really think about what some companies call your superpower. What is it that you bring to the table? It can't be money. Okay, so that's corporate venture capital. Then we've seen venture building, where you say, okay, rather than just waiting until that amazing startup out there emerges and comes to us and we can invest in them, we know, let's have a look at where are the problems, what are potential solutions. If we like the solution, maybe just internally, or one of our clients likes the solution, maybe there's another million clients out there. Can it be basically monetized? So venture building internally requires, again, a very different team. You're looking for people that potentially build every 6 months, just to put a timeline down, 4 to 5 ventures. Every 3 months, those ventures are being tested at certain benchmarks and timelines. By the end of 12 months, maybe only 2 ventures are left. Those ventures are capitalized, are maybe released into the wild rather than kept internally, and then hopefully grow. So that's one part, venture building. And then obviously there is the venture, for example, the venture client model, where we're saying we're not going to invest anyway. We have no idea how to invest. We're not good at that. We leave this to the VCs. But what we do, we have a team out there that understands the problems I have at home. Be it, take for example, one of the companies that really kind of was quite vocal about it as well when they rolled it out is BMW. So they said, we have many problems. I mean, this is BMW in 2015. Right? You can imagine it's the emergence of electric vehicles, it's the emergence of talking about mobility, flying taxis, potentially self-driving cars, all those things that obviously now, almost 10 years later, we know a lot more about, good and bad. They basically said, we're investing in startups, but why don't we just find startups that have solutions and we buy it from them? We just become the client of those startups. No equity changes hands, no money changes hands, except for the money I pay you to deliver me your, new electric battery that fits into my next motorcycle, right? So for example, venture clienting is a very different approach because you're very clearly, it's much closer to the corporate parent, because the corporate parent, obviously, I have a problem, my R&D guys cannot deliver it. Can I buy it out there? Oh, we're buying it from a startup. Well, startups are not ISO certified, are not this, not that, all those things that you need to have if you want to sell something to BMW. So we make life easy for you. And maybe we're buying a solution that is developed not by one startup, but by 2 or 3 startups. And we connect them. They may have not met each other before. Why? Because one comes from Switzerland, one comes from Korea, and one was sitting here in Germany. And we get them to work together for the benefit of us. So again, those are very different approaches. Like I said, I don't think there is a right or wrong on what you should do. Neither is there a right or wrong for a corporate on, because that's the next question. Then which one should we start with? Right. I don't think there is a right or wrong on that. It goes almost back to, and Scott, you were pointing before, to risk. So I talk when I speak to investors and on getting engaged in the widest sense in venturing. You need to have a certain risk appetite and risk capacity. Risk appetite defines how much risk are you willing to take? How much can you stomach? If I come back and said, we just lost 30% on the money that you invested, are you going to run for the hills, or is this okay, right? Because we just made twice as much the months before. Secondly, risk capacity means how much can you lose? How much are you going to put in? Right. So again, this very often is discussed in the context of family offices, right? If you're losing 50% of your assets under management, usually not a good situation, right? So again, it forces you to think about how much you're willing to put on the table. What are your table stakes right now?
It's a really important part of the framework because it's both a combination of what is the risk of this particular activity, and they are different, right? If you look at the venture clienting, which could also be called business development, you say this is probably, in terms of capital, the cheapest option we could pursue. Yeah. It's human capital intensive for sure, and the time of your people matters.
And it's easiest to turn off.
That's right.
If you don't like it.
If we always say, a 6-month pilot can be canceled easily with very few, implications. But if you had a venture capital investment, now you have a 5 to 10 year relationship. If you have internal R&T, if you're doing venture building, sometimes people really care about those projects. They're harder to shut down psychologically. And then of course you have M&A as the fourth of the tools, right? So build, buy, partner, invest. And when you buy, now you own it. And if you have to write it off, that's usually a big deal. So the venture clienting or the business development option is great because it's cheap and it can be shut down fast. But then you have to weigh all of this against what's the upside, right? What can I learn? What new businesses can I launch? What businesses can I defend? What's on the line? So why should I do it? And we'll look at sometimes, say, a conservative $20, $25 billion revenue organization that hates the idea of losing money on an investment. Well, what if we put $10 million into something and we would hate for it to go down? But there's 1,000 times potential return on the business that we would launch with it, and 100 times potential return. And if we think that there's a 1 in 100 chance of that company winning on an expected value basis, you would do it, right? And so as part of a portfolio, which is the interesting part of the venture capital model, you would say, I might tolerate 8 of 10 or 5 of 10 or some predictable number failing in order to get the upside that goes with it. And again, that all ties back to what you said, which is my KPIs have to be tied to where is this business going? What do I think is going to happen in the world? What do my shareholders want? What does my board want? Where's the CEO taking the business right now?
Digging deeper into the corporate venture capital, Scott, designing a CVC thesis is often one of the first steps in structuring a CVC program. What are the main components of a robust thesis, and why it's so important to have these strategies set from the beginning?
It's amazing how if you don't have a plan, your plan doesn't work. So I think, step one is plan your work before you work your plan. And I think that goes back to, who are the stakeholders? What do they want? Aligning the tactics of the CVC to the strategy of the organization, to the overall objectives, and that should really drive those KPIs. We, put together what we call a charter, which is really just a business plan for the CVC. It's got about 80 some components that could be summarized in 15 different elements of strategy. And these include some of the basics of venture capital. What sectors, subsectors are we going after? What stages, again, portfolio balance? What geographies are we targeting? Check size, overall budget, governance. Are we taking, serving on the boards? Are we observers on the boards? Are we somewhat more passive in the governance relationship? Do we lead the rounds? What's the nature of the commercial relationship? How do we think about the portfolio balance of, what touches the core? What's adjacent? What's disruptive? All of those are components of venture capital strategy, and they should all interact, right? So if you say, I'm going to make a lot of seed stage investments and I'm going to do it in a part of the world that's, 12 hours away from where I am. That doesn't work well with actually helping your portfolio companies succeed. Your seed stage investments should probably be close to where your people are located. So if you need to go over and help recruit the new VP of marketing or the new CFO, you actually can show up and do it. So all of these things should interact. They should be, self-reinforcing, and they should flow up to the goals. Once you have that charter, once it's been developed, you need to test it. You need to go to your stakeholders and say, do we all agree that this is the right set of priorities? So when we launched a program with another industrial group, we sat in a room with, the 12 top executives in the company, and we had a list of 20 subcategories, most of which they brainstormed. And we said, let's prioritize these. Let's force rank them and say, we're not going to pursue 20 all at once in the most comprehensive fashion. And we said, maybe the top third. And so we came up with a list. And one of the things that, like any corporation in the industrial space, is going to be focused on sustainability. And sustainability was force ranked into the bottom half. Then we went and we talked to 25 people in 25 days, one-on-one, not in a groupthink meeting. And every single person said sustainability. And we came back to the group and said, here's what your people said. And your CEO promised these KPIs by 2030 to Wall Street. And then as a group, we said, yeah, put sustainability in the top. And so that charter building process goes back to what you said, Artur, which is I'm not just going to draft it and then set it and forget it. I'm going to talk to people constantly and see individually in a group, what do we think matters? And then you can align the tactics of your transactions to the overall goals of the organization.
Building on this, Artur, could you summarize Oxygia's thesis and the main vehicles you use to execute the strategy?
Sure thing. And just going back to the, I can let this one pass. The charter, it took us I think 4 to 5 months to put that together and test that around. And then when we said, okay, this is it, and then we had to change it. So it's a continuing process, so to speak. So back to Oxygia. So we have three mechanisms in which we exchange with the startup ecosystem. We have corporate venture capital, right? That's what we call our outside-in strategy, how we bring stuff from the market to the parent company. We have our inside-out, which is a venture building, which is very complex, very difficult when compared to corporate venture capital, I can tell you that. And we have the Oxygia Labs, which is an acceleration program with the prerogative of investment at the end. CVC basically takes the big check sizes. That's where we look into Series A's and B's. The venture building, again, it's inside out, so we usually spend up to $3.5 million per venture. And the labs is where we sort of take seed investments. That's up to $400,000 or $500,000 checks. But those three different mechanisms have one thing in common, which is the investment thesis, right? Which is two verticals: sustainability and digital transformation. In sustainability, we're basically talking about circular economy. We're talking about decarbonization. We're talking about advanced biomaterials and advanced biochemicals and new materials. The energy transition is within that side of the thesis. And the other side in the digital transformation is basically everything that brings efficiency to the industry, right? So all the concepts around the Industry 4.0, like computer vision, industrial IoT, machine learning, AI, and so on and so forth. And we also look into logistics, right? Logistics 4.0 and the future of mobility. So 3 different investment vehicles, let me put it that way, so we can sort of accompany, startups to a great portion of their journey, and a lot of challenges. I mean, when you talk about venture building, for instance, we learned very fast that you needed not only competencies from inside. So if you have like a co-founder that came from the company that brings the subject matter expertise, the industry knowledge, you need someone from the market. That's it. So we very quickly learned that, and now if we bring something from the company, we take a co-founder from the market. That's the way that we're doing things, at least one. We also make that thing follow what we call the VC route. So regardless if our parent company spend millions of dollars in that initiative, we're gonna grant to the founder and co-founders equity. That's it. So they can really follow up the VC route. So at first we give them, 15% each or whatever the case is. And if they succeed in doing an investment round in the market, we dilute ourselves so they can control the company. So imagine explaining that back to the board. That wasn't easy, but we managed to put that in a way that say, hey, we need to make this work. And just to give you a perspective, I mean, we had some projects that had the opportunity to become ventures internally, but we faced a lot of challenges. I mean, like any major company, for instance, we didn't have the corporate purpose for those startups to commercialize their products or their solutions. That was the first one. Second one is, if you're going to invest, for instance, in something different, or it requires investing in a different tax ID or CNPJ, how we say in Portuguese here in Brazil, you need board approval. And then we showed that to the board, say, hey, there's no way we can do that. So they gave us this autonomy within these boundary conditions, so to make sure that we have the right tools to make this work. So with the autonomy in place, we put together this different compensation mechanism for Exegia, for the incubated companies, and so on and so forth. So again, 3 different mechanisms, a lot of challenges, but we learn as we go.
Well, they all work together.
Yeah,
And
they do.
Culturally,
They
it's
do.
really important to make sure that the groups are not threatened by each other, right? So not everything should be a venture capital investment. Not everything should be
Agreed.
an M&A opportunity or
Agreed.
an internal build. And we always ask this question, do you have the right to play? Do you have the right to win in this? And, when you layer in what are the motivations of the people, what's the right way to bring this solution to market? And you might be better off owning 20% of something and having motivated entrepreneurs on the outside, even though it was born inside the organization. And that's the mindset that has to be layered onto these different things. I think, there's no organization that doesn't have some form of R&D that's an incumbent leader in its space, and almost every single one of these groups has an M&A department led by somebody in corporate development. Now the question is, now you have venture clienting, you have business development, and you have venture capital. You have all 4 tools cooperating together. And when you start actually comparing notes and saying, now what's the right way for our organization to pursue this opportunity in a way that's collaborative and cooperative, it takes a lot of that communication. Again, that's sort of the key theme, is you can't stop talking to each other.
And I don't know where you want to go with the podcast, Max, but one thing that keeps coming up, and I think it's really important to me at least, that this becomes one of the building blocks of a corporate venturing program, is participation in the ecosystem, which is also something not really what corporates usually do, right? So
They push everybody else around, right?
Exactly. You push everyone else around and you stand alone because you're big enough and you don't need a network. When it comes to venturing, whether you're building internally, whether you're investing in the external company, your little startups at one point need the rest of the world. So you need to get them ready for it. You need to make sure the world is ready for them. That means you start having those conversations. I mean, M&A doesn't happen overnight, right? If you have a little startup that potentially could be an M&A target, maybe for someone else, maybe not for you, you probably want to let that party know that you're coming with this thing in 1, 2, 3, 4 years' time. So, and have those conversations. So I think the ecosystem, how do you want to play in the ecosystem? How do you want to be known? That even goes back to running sessions for startups, running little conferences, engaging with academia, for example. So do you want to be part of that? I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, I've never seen a corporate only do we engage with the ecosystem. I think there has to be one of the other building blocks there to give you the justification you mentioned, right to play.
I think you look like a tire kicker if you engage in the ecosystem but never transact.
Never transact. So you have to at one point pull the trigger in one form or the other, right?
We do 3 things, and I think gets back to this. The first one is we only invest if we can help. So you can really have alignment with the startup. So, if it's OpenAI and they have something marvelous, we can help them, unfortunately. But if we're talking about biopolymers or CO2 to chemicals or anything like that, we can. So I think that's very important. So we do that. Second thing we do is we always ask ourselves, are we the right owners or the right investors for this? If we're not, why are you going to keep? Why invest in the first place, and why are you going to keep that in your portfolio, right? And the third thing is going back to what we want from the ecosystem and how we want to engage. Take forward, for instance, we don't talk about ourselves. This is an event for the startup ecosystem, right? We bring you guys, that know about the subject to speak at the event. We showcase the startups that participate in our program, but without making any noise whatsoever for our parent company or for Exesia per se.
Well, the characteristic that you're highlighting is humility, right? And when you say, well, how do big companies approach the market? They're used to being in charge of everything. And, I'm sorry, the startups aren't scared of you. And the startups think they're the mouse that roared and they want to be treated as equals. And the corporations that do well treat them like equals and say, we're going to be partners together. We're good at certain things. You're good at other things. We're better together. The ones that say, I'm going to play bully ball, they fail out of the market very quickly because startups don't want that and venture capitalists don't want that.
And they damage their reputation. I think you mentioned it early on. Super important. So, hence later on, the conversation, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think the ugly part is when it actually starts damaging whatever you're doing in the ecosystem, if it starts damaging the parent company. So, and you want to be, and reputation risk is right top of the
It's
list there.
so important. It takes a long time to build something. And it's very quick to break it.
I would like to move forward to our third part, especially delving deeper into this reputational challenge. CVCs are sometimes facing this reputational challenge with independent venture capitalists and with startups. So, Claudia, can you explore a little bit how a CVC build this credibility, not just with other independent VCs, but also with these high growth, top performance startups?
Yeah. I think you just have to be aware, as in any relationship, with the need and the desire of the party on the other side of the table, right? So I think it's really, number one, startups have no time. There never is time. There never is enough funding. They pivot very quickly. So if you, again, speed is their superpower, which again doesn't come to mind when you think about large corporations usually, okay? So at a minimum, be mindful of that. If, at least don't block them, get out of their way, let them go at their speed. So I think that's very, very important. You want to put the startups up, help the startups to legitimize what they're doing. So, for example, as a startup, your brand is not known yet, but my brand is known as a corporate. Can I help you to that? Can I lift you up to that? However, this is being done inside the organization, but also outside. Use your capabilities. I think a bit of soul searching. What is that one or two, or what's the one thing that we are really, really good at as a corporate? And how can I, let's call it share that with startups? Can I really give them access to it? Usually we've done those interviews, right? Where we say, okay, this is what corporates promised. Did they actually execute on it? Right, and the numbers don't look good.
No,
okay?
They're terrible. We've done those surveys too.
So it's basically, over-promise, under-deliver. That's usually not a good reputation for any relationship, okay? Yeah. So be mindful. Say whatever you're saying in the first or second meeting or as you sign the term sheet with a startup, whatever you're promising, be mindful of that. Make someone, I'm a firm believer in accountability, so call me very German, but what gets counted gets done. Make someone accountable for that. So here is your grandparent in the organization. They will make sure that what we promised on day one gets done. So when they call you, please pick up the phone. Please tell them that, yes, this business is right now, this department is very busy. You will be getting to meet them. So you gotta build those relationships.
We have a policy at Cerity Partners Ventures where if we're going to engage commercially, whether you call it venture clienting or business development, we write it down in a 1 to 2 page LOI. Yeah. Why do you do this? And I say, for us to count it against our own internal KPIs, we say it needs to be written. Well, why? For the reason that you just described. If you write it down, you're probably going to eliminate some miscommunication. What do we expect? What does the startup expect? What does the person in the business unit or the corporation expect? And then we can pilot it lean startup style and say, is it working? Should it be expanded? It doesn't have to be complicated. So I think the two things are simplify. What can we do at first that's easy? Right. So in the example, well, we have a brand, we have a reputation as a corporation. Can we lend that to the startup in some way and introduce them in the market in a way that makes them look good and opens up opportunities? That's not complicated. It requires $0. It requires effort. Can we become a customer? We have one corporation in the life sciences field, and probably our greatest superpower is global distribution. Well, guess what? We're not going to share that with every startup, right? That's probably closer to we're getting ready for M&A. Don't pick the thing that is the most complicated or the most sacred to do as first out of the gate. And then I think to your point, write it down, hold people accountable, see what's working, and don't give up just because it didn't work the first time. I think that's the cultural point that goes back to the empathy with a startup and the speed at which they move. We've had corporations, there's one that we work with in the agricultural industry. We did a pilot, single pilot with row crops, didn't work. Okay, this startup's no good, right? Well, hold on, this is just the first pilot. What went wrong? Can we try again? Can we iterate? And it costs us almost nothing to pilot. Try it again. Maybe try it 3 or 4 times before we decide this startup's no good.
And ultimately, over time, if you write it down and you track it, you will learn so much. You will basically go back. And again, this goes back to accountability, right? So we've tried this 4 or 5 times. It worked 3 out of 5 times.
What did we
Why
learn?
did it work? Why did it work? Who did it work with? Who did it not work with? Like you said, different stages of companies require different types of treatment and different types of parenting, right? So you want to find that out. And you won't find that out in the first 2 or 3 years. This just takes time, but regular going back and saying, let's have another look. What have we learned? Does it work now?
One of the main challenges in CVC is this corporate venturing unit and business unit relationship to leverage the assets of the parent company. Can you, Artur, share some key learnings about how to engage people within the mothership, and what are the challenges, and maybe we can talk a little bit about compensation, not only for the CVC team, but also for the business unit teams.
I think you should talk about the way we've implemented electroshock therapy.
I mean, the challenge is I don't think we have enough time.
Okay.
But I'll try and focus on a few. But I think what has worked for us is to involve the business unit from the get-go. I mean, to ask them, given the investment thesis, what are the opportunities and the segments that they would like to see in the represented in the portfolio, right? So I think that helps get this buy-in from their end, right? And you really want them to test, right? To adopt these solutions, to do pilots, right? To engage with the startups. But here's the caveat. I think it needs to be for good startups, right? You can't bully around like a startup product or service or solution, right? It needs to make sense for them. So we are very careful when we're presenting these startups for the business unit to say, hey, we should run a pilot here, or let's do test this in there and there. So it's a delicate balance, I would say, because you don't want to sort of I don't know how to say this in English, but to burn that channel, you don't want to damage that channel. You need to make sure that you do that in the very, best possible way. And it's very challenging. I mean, when you go to a large corporation and they have you need to knock on the door of a director and he has a million things to do, right? You must make sure that you have a liaison within the company. So it really you need to hold people accountable. And what we've done, which is we have identified a few areas within the parent company that is very important to us. And we say, okay, so in your goals, there's a piece of those goals that they're aligned with Oxygia. And by design with the rest of the portfolio. And in the end of the year, we're the ones that give them the grade for that specific point in their goal. So that helps, that generates accountability. One thing is alignment, another thing is accountability, right? And it's not to promote okay, if you don't help me, that's going to be, a problem for you in terms of your bonus in the end of the year, but at least it helps you to bring this alignment and accountability at the same time.
Well, the other expression you used, Claudia, was you said it's like any relationship. And in any good relationship, both parties are benefiting, right? There's mutual benefit.
Exactly.
So if you said, look, I'm going to give you a grade at the end of the year, and the nature of the relationship is I can punish you, but there's no benefit, that wouldn't work for the business.
Exactly.
And then you get a lot of crossed arm syndrome and no one's doing anything. If you walk in and you say, listen, all of you in the business unit, you are customers of this program. We're here to help you succeed. We're here to help our parent company succeed. We're here to help these startups and their investors succeed. You're not going to find that there's a mutual zone of success in every situation. That's where the analysis has to come in. But if the nature of the relationship is, I'm here to help you in your job so you're more successful, so we all win, people are going to open up more likely to that than if you walk in and say, hey, I remember one CFO of a company that we work with when we launched said, when a startup fails that we funded, how should I punish the people in the business unit? And we all laughed and said, okay, let's reset the conversation. And that person is great at corporate venture capital now. I mean, really valuable member of the investment committee of that corporation. But there was an educational process, which is, this is about everybody winning together. How do we find those opportunities? And when you see that those goals have become misaligned, which happens a lot in corporate venture capital, we fund a company, we thought that there was strategic fit. The startup, for reasons of its own, decided to go in a different direction, and now it's no longer aligned to the parent company.
Yeah.
Now we're financial investor only, right? We still are stewards. We're still fiduciaries. We still want to get an outcome. Maybe we sell our position. Maybe we continue to ride it through the exit and do whatever we can to help them. But we shouldn't pretend that there's strategic alignment or need to involve a business unit when it's no longer relevant. So there's a lot of analysis, communication, thinking to say, does everybody still benefit? And if not, how do we manage the relationship from here?
I just want to add on to one more point to Arturo. So along the scorecard part, I like to borrow a page out of the private equity playbook, and I'd like to incentivize. So, it's the whole carrot and stick conversation. So you can say, yeah, I'm going to score you and you're going to get a, B minus, and you're not going to get that extra 10% on your bonus. But, if you become one of our 3 or 4 business units that becomes my champion and actually comes to me and brings me ideas so I can build something that helps you, I can actually give you on the upside also some.
That's my next step. Like, okay, if you have like 5 or 10% of your goals dedicated to helping Oxysia, how can we make sure that those 10 can be 20?
Correct.
Right? But not taken apart, but it doesn't go to 100, go to 110%, right?
So
As an extra.
As an extra.
Yeah. But I have listened to you talking about internal PR for CVC units. Can you explain a little bit about what it means and why it's so important to educate the whole organization about this strategy?
So again, it goes back to your first question, the why, right? Because ultimately, I like to believe that corporates that are going down the corporate venturing route would like to change the whole parent company as well in terms of thinking, right? So to be able to do so, you need to share continuously. You need to have a champion that does internally relate what you are doing in your CVC space, right? Or in the corporate venturing space. And it's super important because it does many things. If you basically keep communicating, let's say you find a business unit head who gets really engaged with you, and let's say you communicate that inside the organization, global organization, all of a sudden they hear about what the guy in Munich did. And that will make the guys in China and in the US listen up too and say, hey, this guy got so much out of it. Maybe I should find out a little bit more. And all of a sudden you called it from the crossed arms syndrome to kind of like leaning in, shuffling forward on their chair. And all of a sudden they're saying, oh,
what can the venture program do for me?
Correct. So Arturus did this amazing stuff for the guys in Munich. Maybe I should send him my 2 biggest problems. And here you go. You got your shopping list for your venture builders. You got your shopping list for your scouts out there. And all of a sudden, maybe not tomorrow, but at one point you can come back to it. So I think what it does, and it takes a certain person, because ideally what you want someone who understands the parent organization, someone who may have spent there 15, 20 years and knows who to talk to. But you also need someone who understands what you are doing. So he can basically communicate that.
And we were talking about different forms of education and how people learn differently. I think that not only do you need all the ingredients that you just talked about, but you need to package up this information in different ways. So some people learn from a podcast and some people learn by reading. Well, some people are going to learn by reading a report about your portfolio that explain, or some people will read the charter and say, here's what we're looking for. Here's the letter on the portfolio report that says we're looking for investments in these categories. Some people will learn when you bring 3 startups in to present, and you provide an analysis of why you brought those in, why they're related to a topic that we're interested in. And then the light bulb goes off in their head and they get excited by hearing an entrepreneur live and say, oh, what could you do for me? And we use that same expression, Claudia. It's the shopping list, right?
Yes.
And then what can the ventures team go out and find that maybe solves real world business problems that business unit leaders care about?
And I usually tell the teams, the moment you start getting those incoming calls, you know you made it to the next step.
Yeah.
So at that point, it's like, okay, people are starting to listen to us. They're actually paying attention to us. And they're actually calling us. Fantastic.
Guys, I would love to explore the role of AI and all those things, but we are running out of time. So
Next time.
next time, I
Part
would
two.
like to thank you, Claudia, Scott, and Arthur for this engaging and thought-provoking discussion. Throughout this discussion, we have covered a range of topics. And for our listeners, whether you are a corporate leader, a startup founder, or simply someone curious about corporate venture and corporate venture capital, we hope that today's conversation has left you inspired and better prepared to navigate this exciting field. So until next time, thanks a lot for you guys. I'm Maximiliano Carlomanho. Thank you for joining us, and let's move forward.